Imagine waking up to headlines that a teenager was found inside a rolled-up gym mat at his high school. Bizarre, right? Well, it gets even more unsettling once you hear the official story versus what his family believes actually happened. This case has been swirling with questions, rumors, and shocking details ever since 2013. Fast forward to right now, and everything's been thrown back into the spotlight by a recent appeals court decision, which means we might finally get closer to the real truth about how Kendrick died. If you think you've heard it all, buckle up, because there are layers here that are just now coming to light. This is one of the most puzzling cases of the last decade, the Kendrick Johnson story. In this video, we're going to unravel the main facts, the controversies, and the wild twists that have kept people hooked on this mystery for years. We'll walk through what happened on that tragic day, why Kendrick's parents have never stopped fighting for answers, and how this new legal development could change everything. Oh, and fair warning, this case involves some pretty intense details, so consider this your heads up. But here's the thing. This isn't about jumping on conspiracy theories or sensationalizing a tragedy. Our goal is to lay out exactly what went down, the evidence everyone's talking about, and what's really happening with this reopened investigation. By the end, you'll see why so many folks are calling this the case that refuses to rest. All right, let's dive in. Stick around, and I promise you'll walk away with a clear picture of why Kendrick Johnson's story matters now more than ever. Trust me, you won't want to miss a second of this. In January 2013, the quiet city of Valdosta, Georgia, became the focus of national attention when Kendrick Johnson, a 17-year-old student at Lowndes High School, was found dead inside a rolled-up gym mat in his school's gymnasium. Authorities initially labeled it a freak accident. They said Kendrick might have been trying to retrieve a lost shoe and got trapped, ultimately suffocating in a standing-up mat. But from day one, his parents and supporters were adamant that something else happened, something far more sinister. The official explanation left too many questions. Why was the security footage missing key moments? Why were there inconsistencies in the autopsy report? And how could Kendrick have ended up in that mat all by himself? Even if you've just heard whispers about this case, there's no denying it's filled with strange details that don't quite fit a typical accidental death narrative. Before we dig into the investigations, the controversies, and this brand new appeals court decision, we need a solid understanding of what supposedly happened that day. In a nutshell, the sheriff's department concluded Kendrick's death was caused by positional asphyxia, meaning he was stuck in a position that prevented him from breathing. But that conclusion never sat well with his family. They believed foul play had to be involved, and immediately began pushing authorities to look deeper. That pressure sparked a wave of coverage and online discussions, all centered around one haunting question. How does a healthy teenager end up inside a rolled gym mat with no clear explanation? By the end of this overview, you'll see why so many people can't accept the accidents theory without further proof. And this is just the baseline. There's a lot more to unpack. So, let's move forward and piece together the investigation details that turned this case into one of the most hotly debated mysteries in recent years. Right after Kendrick was discovered inside that rolled-up gym mat, the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office took charge of the scene. Their initial assessment? They believed it was an accident, a case of a teenager simply trying to grab a lost shoe. According to their statement, Kendrick climbed into the mat from the top, got stuck, and couldn't breathe. The medical examiner supported this conclusion, classifying his death as positional asphyxia. For the authorities, it seemed open and shut. But here's where things start raising eyebrows. Video surveillance in the gym exists, yet there's this unsettling gap, footage missing or blurred during the critical time frame leading up to Kendrick's disappearance. That alone sparked a ton of questions online and among the community. Did the cameras really fail at the worst possible moment, or was something overlooked? Then there's the crime scene itself. Some folks argued it wasn't secured quickly enough, potentially compromising evidence. You can imagine how all this fueled suspicions. As more details emerged, it became obvious Kendrick's family wasn't satisfied with the story that he died retrieving a shoe. They pointed out the odd placement of his sneakers, the blood patterns in the gym, and the fact that crucial parts of the footage seemed incomplete. These inconsistencies left many people wondering if someone else was involved, and if that person or persons managed to leave almost no trace. Whether you take the official version at face value or see red flags everywhere, it's clear this investigation had gaps right from the start. The problem is, once the sheriff's department labeled Kendrick's death accidental, the case didn't seem to get the kind of deeper scrutiny the family believed it deserved. And that's one big reason why, years later, the Johnsons continued to fight for a more thorough look into how everything was handled. So when you hear folks saying, this case is just too strange to ignore, it's because those early investigative steps raised more questions than they answered. Even if it was an accident, the missing footage, the contested handling of evidence, and the conflicting opinions about Kendrick's final moments are what keep people, even now, asking for a second or third look. The Johnson family wasn't about to accept the initial conclusion that Kendrick's death was just some freak accident. The moment they heard the official positional asphyxia ruling, they started making moves to prove otherwise, because from their perspective, the story didn't add up. One of their biggest steps was hiring independent pathologists to conduct additional autopsies, and this is where things get really complicated. In the first independent autopsy, a pathologist reportedly found signs of blunt force trauma on Kendrick's body, something that wasn't mentioned in the original medical examiner's report. That discovery alone sparked an immediate backlash against the official ruling. Some people even claimed that Kendrick's organs were missing, although the authorities later said those organs had been removed as part of the standard autopsy procedure, then disposed of by the funeral home. It's a lot to process, right? But when details like this circulate, it's no wonder the Johnson family felt the need to keep digging for answers. You might be thinking, so what's real and what's just rumor? Well, the truth is a bit of both. On one hand, the funeral home admitted to using newspaper to fill space inside Kendrick's body, an old, highly criticized practice that raised red flags. On the other hand, official statements from the coroner's office insist there was nothing unusual about how the autopsy was carried out. But that tension, the difference between what the family's pathologist reported and what the original autopsy showed, is exactly why the Johnsons pushed for a more thorough investigation. In the world of forensics, it's not uncommon for different medical examiners to come to slightly varying conclusions, especially if tissue samples are limited or if chain of custody issues pop up. But in Kendrick's case, these discrepancies were significant enough that they fueled the family's belief that foul play had to be involved. They started going to the media, holding press conferences and rallying support online. And that advocacy, driven by the stark contrast between autopsy findings, became a cornerstone for the Johnsons' ongoing pursuit of justice. So if you've ever wondered why this case refused to fade from the headlines, this is a major reason why. The question isn't just whether Kendrick died by accident or by someone's hand. It's also about whether the initial investigation and the very autopsy that declared his death accidental might have missed or ignored critical details. And as we'll see in the next part of our deep dive, all this controversy turned what could have been a short-lived local story into a national debate that's still raging today. Once the details of Kendrick Johnson's death hit the internet, it didn't take long for the story to go viral. At first, it was local news stations talking about the mysterious discovery at Lowndes High School. But soon, national outlets picked up the case, especially as more and more unusual details surfaced. And in today's world, once something grips the public's attention, social media takes over. Facebook groups, Twitter threads, YouTube videos. Everywhere you looked, people were speculating, analyzing footage, and sharing theories on what really happened to Kendrick. Hashtags about justice for him were all over platforms like Instagram and Twitter, and these online movements poured gasoline on the fire of public curiosity. Thousands of people signed petitions calling for reopened investigations, and those petitions were then forwarded to higher officials, including federal agencies. Major media outlets also ran with the story, dedicating entire segments to the conflicting narratives. And this wasn't just a quick headline in passing. Some news networks brought in legal analysts, forensic experts, and even pathologists to discuss the case's inconsistencies. The more they talked, the more people were pulled in. After all, how often do you hear about a teenager found in a gym mat with missing surveillance footage and conflicting autopsy results? It was just one of those stories that made viewers stop and say, "Wait, what?" Social media played a huge role in keeping the case in the spotlight. In the past, a local controversy might have stayed local, but this time, individuals from across the country and even overseas were discussing the circumstances of Kendrick's death. By sharing their doubts, theories, and support for the family, online communities helped pressure officials to consider a deeper look. That surge of collective outrage and curiosity essentially forced authorities to address the public's demands for clarity. But let's be real. With massive attention comes a flood of misinformation. Plenty of rumors circulated without solid evidence, and debate threads sometimes turned into wild speculation. Some online commentators were convinced there was a massive cover-up, while others believed law enforcement's original conclusions. Regardless of where the truth lay, one thing was certain. The spotlight was now on the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office, and the Johnson family had the vocal backing of thousands of people insisting on answers. That's the power of media and social platforms these days. When a story strikes a nerve, it doesn't just disappear. Instead, it gets dissected, reposted, and argued about until it becomes impossible for officials to ignore. And that sort of unrelenting attention was undoubtedly a driving force behind the push for a closer re-examination of Kendrick's case. When we look back, the media frenzy was both a blessing and a curse. It helped keep the narrative alive, but also introduced a lot of outside noise that made it tough to separate fact from fiction. Even so, there's no denying that without that wave of public interest, online and on air, the calls for reopening the investigation might have stalled out a long time ago. In many ways, the spotlight on Kendrick Johnson's story is a testament to how digital platforms can amplify a family's fight for what they believe is justice, turning a local mystery into a nationwide conversation. After years of back-and-forth legal battles, repeated requests from the Johnson family, and growing public pressure, the Kendrick Johnson case finally landed back on the radar in a major way. An appeals court recently decided that there's enough cause to reopen the investigation, an unexpected twist considering how many times the door seemed to be slammed shut on this case. The court didn't go so far as to declare a new outcome, but it did rule that the initial processes and conclusions warranted a second look, which is monumental in a case that many believed was closed for good. From a legal standpoint, this decision essentially means that the court saw possible merit in the claims of either mishandled evidence or overlooked details. It's not a guarantee that the original ruling, accidental death, will be overturned, but it does open the door for fresh testimony, potentially new forensic tests, and interviews with individuals who may have been sidelined or missed entirely in the first round of investigations. For the Johnson family, it's validation that their calls for deeper scrutiny weren't just them chasing conspiracy theories. Their hope is that this reopened inquiry will shine a light on any discrepancies that the initial investigation might have glossed over, especially when it comes to that questionable surveillance footage or the conflicting autopsy findings. Does this mean we'll have a definitive answer soon? Not necessarily. Legal proceedings can stretch on for months or even years, and often bring more questions than answers. However, what's different now is that authorities are once again compelled to revisit and reevaluate the evidence with fresh eyes. As we move forward, the critical thing to watch is whether this new look at the case uncovers any game-changing facts or simply reinforces the original conclusion. Either way, the spotlight is back on Kendrick's story, and all eyes are on how this second chance at justice plays out. One of the biggest reasons the Kendrick Johnson case has caught fire online is the sheer number of theories swirling around. Some people claim other students may have been involved, suggesting foul play that was somehow covered up. Others point to local officials hinting at a conspiracy to hide evidence or protect someone with connections. And of course, there's the official theory of a tragic accident, Kendrick reaching into the mat for a shoe and getting stuck. It's a wide spectrum, and each angle has its own vocal supporters. Here's the thing, while many of these theories make for compelling conversation, not all of them are rooted in verified evidence. In fact, a lot of the inside info people share online can come from unconfirmed leaks, misread documents, or pure speculation. And when emotions run high, it's easy to blend unproven theories with real facts. That said, it's perfectly reasonable to question why certain details, like missing surveillance footage, still haven't been convincingly explained. Even if you believe the official account, those loose ends can leave room for doubt. For now, all we can do is acknowledge what has been confirmed and what remains unproven. That's why the appeals court's decision to reopen the case is so crucial. It gives investigators a chance to revisit old evidence with fresh eyes and either confirm or debunk certain rumors once and for all. No matter which theory you lean toward, the best approach is to wait for actual findings from this renewed investigation rather than relying on hearsay. In the end, Kendrick's family deserves a resolution grounded in facts, not speculation. In Valdosta, Georgia, Kendrick Johnson's death became much more than a heartbreaking incident at a local high school. For many residents, it highlighted deep concerns about how quickly, or not, serious investigations are conducted, particularly when questions of race or official negligence come into play. It wasn't long before the case sparked larger discussions about systemic transparency, student safety, and the trust, or lack thereof, between the community and local law enforcement. Within weeks of the story breaking, local vigils and rallies drew attention to the unresolved questions surrounding Kendrick's death, but they also unearthed simmering tensions about inequality and accountability in the region. People began questioning whether the investigation had been handled differently because of who Kendrick was, or whether certain leads were left unexplored. These concerns weren't just local chatter, they started reflecting a national conversation on how certain cases gain or lose momentum based on public outcry and scrutiny. Beyond Valdosta, the Kendrick Johnson case contributed to an ongoing dialogue about racial disparities in the justice system and how vital transparency is in any investigation, especially one involving the death of a minor. For activists and community leaders, the circumstances of Kendrick's death became a rallying point for broader reforms, including better oversight of school security systems and clearer guidelines for how potential crime scenes are managed. Even people who were initially unfamiliar with Valdosta found themselves pulled into the debate once social media catapulted the case into national headlines. All this underscores how a single tragedy can send ripples far beyond one town. Kendrick Johnson's death not only shook his immediate community, but also amplified ongoing discussions about the need for thorough, unbiased investigations, no matter who is involved. As a result, many in Valdosta and across the country continue to keep a close eye on any official updates, hoping that renewed public interest and scrutiny will lead to answers that have, for too long, remained elusive. As the appeals court decision breathes new life into the Kendrick Johnson case, there are a few possible paths forward. On one hand, investigators might return to the gym, re-examine the mats, the layout, and any traces of evidence still on file. They could also call on specialists to analyze that mysteriously missing or blurred video footage, maybe even run it through advanced software to see if anything was overlooked. If new evidence emerges or old leads suddenly look more promising, we could see an entirely new wave of interviews and forensic testing. Another scenario is that the court simply confirms the original ruling. If, after reviewing everything, the evidence still supports that Kendrick's death was an accident, the case might remain closed, only this time with a double stamp of confirmation. That outcome would bring its own wave of reactions, relief for some who believed the initial story, frustration or heartbreak for those who still suspect foul play. The wild card here is that fresh witnesses could come forward or additional experts might offer new opinions. Sometimes, just the act of reopening a case encourages people who stayed silent before to speak up, or prompts researchers to apply new scientific techniques that weren't available back in 2013. This might lead to clarifications on details like the autopsy controversies or the exact timeline surrounding Kendrick's disappearance. Regardless of how it unfolds, one thing is certain: there's renewed momentum in the search for truth. That means the family, the community, and everyone who's followed this case online are watching closely to see if this second look will finally provide the clarity that's been missing for years. Whether that means uncovering new evidence of wrongdoing or definitively reinforcing the accidental death theory, the stakes are high for Kendrick's loved ones, for the local authorities, and for anyone who believes the justice system should leave no stone unturned. In the end, all eyes remain on Valdosta, waiting to see if this reopened investigation can deliver what so many have been seeking all along: real answers. At the end of the day, the Kendrick Johnson case is about far more than just whether his death was an accident or foul play. It's about a family's relentless pursuit of answers, a community's questions about justice, and a nation's grappling with how our systems handle complex cases. No matter which theory you believe, or if you're still on the fence, what's clear is that there's a lot at stake. With the appeals court's decision to revisit the investigation, we may be on the brink of finally understanding what happened in that gym back in 2013. Or we might discover that the original conclusion still stands, this time backed by a more thorough scrutiny of the facts. Either way, we can't forget that a teenage life was lost under unusual circumstances, and his family has spent years shouldering the uncertainty of it all. If there's one thing to take from this story, it's how crucial transparency and diligence are when it comes to investigations, especially ones that capture the public's imagination like this. Maybe this new look at Kendrick's case will bring closure for those who've long suspected something more sinister was at play. Or it could reaffirm that accidents, however strange, do happen. In either scenario, it's a chance for officials, media, and all of us watching to do right by Kendrick's memory, making sure every angle is explored. No matter how this ends, one thing is for sure: people won't stop talking about Kendrick Johnson's story until the full truth, whatever it may be, sees the light of day. If you're still here, you care about more than just the headlines. You care about the silence between the facts, about what it means when someone dies and no one wants to talk about it. If this story moved you, stay with us, because Unfolded Enigmas is just getting started.